Hey guys, back with a video on Luckin Coffee, and this will be a deep look at Luckin Coffee's financials. Well, even though we currently have no new news, so currently Luckin Coffee is still halted for trading and we don't have any news from the company regarding cleaned up finances. But what I'm going to do in this video is, first of all, I will look at what Luckin Coffee has been reporting in the past, and then I'm trying to clean up their finances as they have been reporting it, make my own views on what I think could be the real numbers here, and then look onto the valuation of Luckin Coffee for now and for the future. So this video really is for those people who are either got invested in Luckin Coffee before the fraud happened and before it got revealed and the stock plunged and crashed and got halted, or for those people who are actually sitting on the sidelines and are thinking, well, is it maybe too much how the stock has reacted? Is it maybe a good opportunity? And maybe now it is time to get into Luckin Coffee when the trading halt will resume. And as you know, full transparency here, I am personally also invested with a very tiny amount of Luckin Coffee shares. So for me, currently the perspective on things is also looking at it in terms of, well, is this now a opportunity to get in case of that Luckin Coffee will be trading again? So yeah, I'm also not sitting on the sidelines here. I really have some money invested, although currently not a lot. And I'm hoping that by the end of the video you will get a better understanding of, judging for yourself what you could do with Luckin Coffee right now. So I'm not giving you advice whether you should buy, hold or sell any stock. What I'm trying to do is to give you the information and actually reasonable information that you could make up your own mind what is the best in your personal situation. So no way this is stock trading advice. It's only my personal opinion and also how I come up with my own valuations of stocks, and well, by the end I also let you know how I'm personally trading it. And in my personal view, we do have some good chances to see Luckin Coffee trading again, because personally I do think that they're currently trying to clean up the finances and also, well, punish hopefully those who are responsible for it. And we also see that China in general is taking this issue very serious. We have some big issues here for China ADRs in general. So having a bad image as that Chinese stocks are involved in some, defrauding investors and stuff like that. And so we had the vice president of China, Liu He, coming forward. So he is not just anybody. He's been the guy who's been involved in a trade war between China and the US and been negotiating with Trump. So this is a big guy stepping forward. And we also saw that local authorities, the CSRC, has been raiding Luckin Coffee offices and are possibly even cooperating with US institutions like the SEC. At least Luckin Coffee is cooperating with both of those authorities. So in general, I do think we should possibly see some cleaning up happening here. The outcomes, of course, are, well, still up to speculation as of for now, but let's just assume for this video that Luckin Coffee comes back for trading. And then what I came up with here is doing my own napkin business case, once again judging my own valuation here. So in the first bit I will talk a little bit about Luckin Coffee KPIs as reported by Luckin Coffee themselves. And then I'm trying to take a step further and try to clean up those numbers and give you my views on what I think could be the real numbers after the cleanup happened of those numbers. I will also talk about the cash position of Luckin Coffee, which I'm calculating myself, because I do think this is important in order to judge what could happen to the company later on. And then I'm trying to do a valuation of the company and the stock price for the current situation. So judging on whether now it's undervalued or overvalued, and also for the future. So yeah, watch the video till the very end. Give it a like if you find this very informative. And yeah, without any further talking, let's just jump into this Excel file. So this is a napkin business case. This means that it's not overcomplicated, and in no way it will be reflecting the real business case of Luckin Coffee, because it's simply just too oversimplified here. But at the same time, it removes a lot of complexity and it gives you a good understanding of hopefully the most important assumptions regarding the business model of Luckin Coffee, and thereby you can use it to judge the Luckin Coffee valuation. So in the first step, what you can see here is Luckin Coffee numbers starting from Q1 2018 till Q1 2019. So these the Q1 2019 numbers are the last numbers that have been actually verified by auditors. That's because these numbers have been verified before Luckin Coffee IPO'd. This happened in Q2 2019, and then between Q2 2019 and Q4 2019, this is where the fraud happened. Because if you're looking at the statement that Luckin Coffee revealed regarding the ongoing investigation, they said that fabricated transactions have been taking place from the second quarter 2019 till the fourth quarter of 2019 and value around 2.2 billion RMB. So these are the numbers that Luckin Coffee reported until the Q3 2019 earnings. And I used it to calculate mostly here in US dollars. That makes it a little bit easier. And you can see that in Q3 2019, they reported 218 million US dollars in transactions. And the number of stores went up till 3,680. They guided for around 4,000 stores in Q4 2019. And they also said they had around accumulated number of transacting customers of 30 million in Q3 2019, and average quarterly items sold around 132 million, as well as revenues per store of around 419,000 US dollars. And I highlighted those numbers here in yellow because these are the numbers that, according to the statement by Luckin Coffee, have been artificially inflated. So they inflated the sales, but at the same time also inflated the costs and expenses related to that. But here in this business model, I'm mostly looking only at the revenue side of things. Then there are some more important KPIs. So for instance, they are outlining the revenue per item sold. Usually it's around 12 yuan. And they also say that they have revenue per transacting customers of around 50 yuan. And they also have transacting customers per store reaching about 8,000. So this translates into items per customers of 4.3 items. And numbers of items per store per day of around 444. So these are the numbers of items per store per day that have been actually published by Luckin Coffee officially in the quarterly earnings. I did a quick check here with my own calculations, which may be a little bit different, but I don't know about the exact way that Luckin Coffee has calculated them by themselves. I just did a quick check here. So these are the official numbers reported by Luckin Coffee themselves, right? So now the important part here is, we have the inflated numbers possibly for the quarterly items sold and as well for the revenues per store. And here's another question mark regarding the new customers, or the customers, the customer base that Luckin Coffee actually published. Is this real or not? We don't know. For my model here, I left them as they are as a basis of calculation, and I assume that only the sales and the expenses have been inflated as outlined by the Luckin Coffee report. So because we still don't have any updated numbers, and it may take more time for the investigation and the auditors to finish up their work and coming up with clean numbers, I try to make my own assumptions in order to come up with a conclusion of where I think Luckin Coffee is heading. And in order to do that, for me, the biggest challenge was to say which of those numbers that Luckin Coffee actually published can still be relied upon, and which are the ones that I need to change in order to get a correction of actually what really happened. And I did it by actually looking at the revenue per store, which was on average around 206,000 US dollars before Luckin Coffee IPO'd. So this is the average of the quarters reported before the IPO, and these are actually the quarters that have been validated by auditors before Luckin Coffee actually went IPO. And I used those average revenues to come up with new estimations for the Luckin Coffee revenues here, because one of the variables, which is the number of stores for Luckin Coffee, has actually not been questioned by the short seller report of Muddy Waters. And it's actually one of those numbers which I think is still quite legitimate from the numbers that Luckin Coffee has been reporting so far. So this is one of the variables that we possibly don't have to change here. So I use, as you can see here, the average revenue per store in order to come up with new revenue numbers here for the quarters in which the fraud has happened. And I actually think that it makes sense to calculate with those averages for the stores, because actually it would be too big of an assumption to think that Luckin Coffee can open new stores very fast and at the same time grow the revenue of each of those stores, because I would actually assume that for a new store opened, this store would actually still need a little bit of time to pick up some traction. At the same time, growing the numbers of store for Luckin Coffee and keeping the average of the revenue along of those new stores actually the same would already be quite an achievement. So I would come up with around $86 million in revenue for Q2, $100 million in Q3, and above $100 million in Q4, which has not been announced yet. And that would differ from the officially announced Luckin Coffee numbers by around $42 million in difference for Q2, in $110 million in difference for Q3. And also I include the Q4 as part of the fraud quarters that has happened here. Luckin Coffee has kind of guided to, would be able to achieve around 300 or above $300 million in Q4. And I would say it would be around $116 million for this quarter. So here we would already see $156 million in difference between what Luckin Coffee reported and what would be the actual, according to my calculations, in Q4. And if you look at it, it really sums up to the $310 million that Luckin Coffee was speaking of. That would be the fraud, the sum of the fraud that has happened. So it should be actually quite close to what would be the real numbers in terms of the Luckin Coffee business after the investigation has finished. So those red highlighted numbers here are actually the new revenue assumptions that I will be carrying forward. And I'm looking at the rest of the KPIs here in order to see what those new revenue numbers are actually implying for the business. So first of all, it would mean that Luckin Coffee growth has been slowing down to around 28% quarter-on-quarter growth, coming down to actually only 9% quarter-on-quarter growth in Q4 2019. This would actually already reflect a little bit the Roni situation taking off in Q4 2019 in China, and also it would reflect that the slowing down of growth for Luckin Coffee, which actually, in my point of view, is kind of reasonable to assume that. Alright, so with those new revenue numbers, we can go ahead and recalculate the number of items sold just by using the average price of 12 yuan per item sold that Luckin Coffee has published before. And also the number of items sold per day, which is now to be found below 200. And that actually correlates with the short seller report by Muddy Waters, which have been, they have been going to the stores and calculating in a couple of locations how many items have been sold. And they have a number slightly above 200. And this new calculation will actually resonate with that. So I'm thinking that my numbers could be quite close to the actual case actually, and actually in line with the short seller report here. This, of course, has a couple of more consequences here on the number of items sold per customer per quarter, which will now be in a declining and negative trend, going down to 1.76 in Q4. And the same goes for the revenue per transacting customer, which will be going down to around roughly 20 yuan per customer in Q4. And here in this line 78 and 79, I just gave some outlines about the items per customer actually, according to these new numbers, compared to the items per customer how they have been inflated regarding what has been reported by Luckin Coffee. Yeah? So now with those revenues, we can make some new assumptions about the Luckin Coffee business model and business case using the customer acquisition costs, which have been reported by Luckin Coffee officially to be around 55 yuan per customer in Q3 and Q4. And I just made a quick calculation based on their sales and marketing expenses, which they have outlined. And it's going to be roughly the same if I use those costs as a baseline. The open question will be here whether or not those numbers have been inflated as well. So as we see in the statement, Luckin Coffee said that also the expenses have been inflated. For this case here, I don't make the assumption that also the marketing costs have been inflated. I guess that their inflation possibly was on the cost of goods sold side, so maybe the cost of the products and the input of the raw materials and stuff like that, that might be inflated. Because 55 yuan customer acquisition cost actually sounds quite reasonable. It doesn't sound too high in my point of view. But now we can make some new assumptions about the business model here. And in order to do this, I made a quick CLV, so that's a customer lifetime value calculation, which there are different ways of doing that, and we are missing quite a few variables here in order to make a real one. But I just did a quick rough calculation here based on the break-even number per customer according to their sales and marketing spend, which would be in Q3, it would be 2.06 transactions per customer that would be required in order to break even on the customer acquisition cost as outlined by the sales and marketing cost. So they are acquiring a user for 50 yuan roughly, and each of those users is making 2.06 transactions and giving them about around 24 RMB in revenue. So that means that after 2.06 transactions, one customer would break even on the revenue basis, purely revenue, right? So there's no profit there. There is no, that's just purely getting back the customer acquisition cost. But this would show you that once a customer is kind of doing more transactions on a quarterly basis, that actually this customer would become profitable on the level of customer acquisition cost. So here with the misconducted and frauded numbers by Luckin Coffee, it would show that still they make 2.26 times more transactions per quarter according to Luckin Coffee, which would be a good sign. That means the business can actually grow like that, because once you get the customer to pay in onto your other costs that you need to pay for the goods and also for the operational costs, it could turn into a profitable model, right? However, with the new numbers here, it shows that already in Q3 the number went actually flat, which means that the customer on average makes so many transactions that they can actually only pay back the cost that they have used to acquire this customer, but nothing more. So this shows there is some fault into the business model here, that either the customer acquisition costs are too high, or the revenues are even not enough, or that the customers are actually not sticky enough on the entire customer base here. So that means that some of the customers are obviously churning. That means they are not coming back, not buying more Luckin Coffee products, and the new customers are actually not enough in order to keep up with that. So that would show, but we don't have the exact data on that because Luckin Coffee is not showing this data in their financial reports. But that would actually be very bad news for the Luckin Coffee business model, particularly if we also look here at Q4, in which this number is actually going into the negative. And that means that they don't even win back the cost of for which they have acquired a customer. So yes, this is indeed the most crucial number to watch in the future, and here it's based on my own calculations that I have been doing, and we need to kind of come up and match this once Luckin will be announcing new numbers. And because this will break or make their business model if it's showing those declining curves, and if they are not even profitable on the user acquisition level. That means that there's a big flaw in the business model, because it means that possibly there are too many users actually churning. That means they are leaving the business without making any further transactions, and the newly acquired customers are possibly not the ones who are making up for those transactions, because looking at across the entire acquired user base, we will see this declining downtrend. On the other hand, I also want to give a different perspective of things, because we really only, if you look at this, we only have a couple of quarters of data here, and this may not be enough. So really investing in Luckin Coffee is like being an angel investor here, where you just believe in the vision of the company and you don't have enough of data to actually prove the case. And it could actually be well the case that because Luckin is growing so fast, that we actually get a couple of not truly revealing data points here, in terms of that the growth kind of overshadows the real customer acquisition points and costs, because what you can see is that usually during the lifetime of a cohort that you acquire and users, they first have a spike when you acquire them, they make a little bit of money for your business, then they possibly don't come back for a couple of days. And then, for instance, in e-commerce, it takes up to half a year until they come back actually and make more transactions. And we literally don't have this long enough data points for Luckin yet that we actually know that they are profitable on each of those customers that are acquiring. But this is the task for the management, to actually clarify like what is currently going on there, and then make a real case that is actually true and believable in terms of what it can mean in the future. And then it's part of the investors, if they are either scared by this, by seeing it's turning negative here, or if they believe in the new management vision, and that might be partly to, well, can Luckin actually re-establish its trust, because the numbers may by themselves be too weak in order to make investors stay in the company, despite the fact that the numbers are how they are. Now, another really important aspect is the cash position of Luckin Coffee. And what I've done here is I took the numbers that we know that they have reported. So starting from Q4, they reported around $250 million in cash in the banks. And then it declined further, having first a burn rate of around $60 million. And then in Q2 2019, they obviously raised more than $800 million and reported a cash position of $882 million in the banks. So that's leaving them at a burn rate of around $120 million, actually a little bit declining later on, but I was keeping on calculating with around roughly $150 million in burn rate here. Because the last number that we've got from Luckin here is $776 million in cash in the banks, and then given this burn rate, that would have declined in Q4 to roughly $600 million in the banks. And then obviously in Q1 they did another raise by offering a convertible and also doing a second offering, in total valued at $860 million, and adding that to the cash position and assuming another $200 million in quarterly burn, they would end up in roughly $1.3 billion in cash. But this is all assuming that the reported numbers that by Luckin Coffee are actually correct. I assume that they are not part of the fraud, because that would also mean that the CFO might be actually involved in the fraud. Actually, the cash position could be just taken from their bank statements and has nothing to do with the blown up sales and artificially blown up expenses. So hopefully they are correct. And then obviously we need to see if my burn rate that I've been calculating is correct here too. But actually that would mean $1.3 billion in cash is actually quite good. That gives them roughly 10 quarters of runway, so more than a year runway until they would run out in cash, with an average of around 130 million per quarter in burn rate. So that would be actually quite positive in terms of can Luckin Coffee as a business survive. And given the fact that they are currently out of trust, really trashed, not being able to raise new capital, that would be really interesting and really valuable for the company to have such kind of a big cash position right now. On the other hand, you could also argue that, well, now we have the investigation going on, and possibly Luckin Coffee wants to reimburse the investors because obviously the cash raise in Q1 has been done with false information, and this has been part of the fraud raising this money. But actually, my views on that is that it's quite unlikely that they will reimburse investors, which on one hand side is obviously bad. But we have only rare cases in which such kind of lawsuits against investors are against companies by investors are actually successful. And at the same time, it's actually kind of part of the interest of those investors who are staying aboard on the ship of Luckin Coffee, because they want actually Luckin Coffee to survive the next couple of months. Because if you, for instance, make the assumption that we need to subtract all of the money that they have raised, for instance, reimbursing those investors, they would end up with around $426 million in the banks, which roughly translates into only 3/4 of runway. And that against the context and the backdrop of having, not much trust anymore, it will be really tough for Luckin Coffee to survive and raise the money necessary to go forward. And with that in mind, we can finally go on and actually do the valuation of Luckin Coffee for today and also for the future. So what I've done here is basically a 5-year business case, once again, using the revenue estimations that I've made based on my own calculations for 2019, so roughly $380 million in revenue based, on my revenue estimations that I've outlined here for the quarters corrected. And that would translate still into more than 200% in growth year on year, which is still massive as a business. You rarely find companies that are growing faster than 20% in the market. So 200% is really, really fast. And obviously this is also due to the fact that Luckin Coffee is such an early stage business as well. So based on these revenues, if we give the current revenues of 2019 a multiple of 3, of just the sales, a sales multiple of 3, we would end up with a valuation of Luckin Coffee of around $1.1 billion in market cap. And that translates into a share price of roughly $4.50. So this is very close to what Luckin Coffee has been trading before the stock got halted. And so this means that investors are kind of only putting a 3 multiple on the sales currently on Luckin Coffee, possibly because all of the trust in Luckin Coffee has been erased and we don't have clear prospects on how it could go further onwards. You could say Luckin Coffee is currently undervalued if you agree to the scenario that the cash position is actually quite positive, and also that they possibly still have a good market in which they're operating, and actually they have the stores in place and everything, and they're fast growing. So you could up to an industry average multiple around 10. I think Starbucks is currently trading around 11x multiple of their sales. So that would translate into a share price for Luckin around $15 a share. Or you could even say, because of the fact that Luckin Coffee is actually a fast-growing business and you still believe in the long-term prospects, you give them like a 30 multiple, which is not something quite uncommon for fast-growing startups to be valued at. And that would put them even at a share price of around, above $40 a share. So it really depends on your approach. Are you more conservative or more optimistic? And certainly most of the investors are now leaning towards giving Luckin Coffee only a 3x multiple on their revenues. But let's also look into the future. What could it mean into the future if we kind of write the revenue growths forward? So I assumed here next year they grow 150%, then they grow 100%, then 80%, then 50%, which actually means, well, their growth will be declining, which is obviously natural, but in overall it still keeps a highly growing business. So it's actually quite likely that they could actually continue on such a path if everything works out for them. That would so they would end up with around $5 billion in sales in 5 years time by 2023. And maybe, now they have guided for 12% profitability on a store level in 2020, and possibly they could grow that to 20% in 2023, and an operating profit currently obviously negative, but they can improve on that over time, ending up with 5% operating profit in 2023. So that gives them operating profit of $250 million in 2023. And once again, valuating Luckin Coffee on that, so possibly giving them a multiple of 15 as a fast-growing business as they are, that would put them at least at a share price of $15 a share currently, or in the future, if they actually even manage to execute on those numbers. I would say a higher multiple would be actually quite realistic. So as a possible share price might be around $30 a share in the future, but still they would need more than $1 billion in new funding, because they would still keep burning cash during those years. But obviously that would be a realistic business case that possibly the management would like to propose and put forward. But now they need to provide the real arguments, which are audited numbers that make sense, a growth scenario, how they can execute on those numbers, and also a way how they can reestablish confidence for investors. So that means who is responsible for the fraud, who is actually taking the consequences, and thereby, kind of building a new trust for the investor basis going forward. So these are a couple of different scenarios that I want to outline here based on new calculations that I've been doing based on different multiples that you can actually look at Luckin Coffee depending on, for instance, their cash basis, how likely the revenue growth will be, and also the different KPIs that I've outlined here. Now, in my next video, I want to go actually deeper into that and put a little bit of a probability on those different scenarios, and also tell you a little bit more like which scenarios I personally are favoring currently and what I am personally going to do. I do think we still have a little bit of time until they come up with the new numbers, so I can do a separate video on that, because there was a lot of information to digest in this video. But if you find this kind of information valuable as of today already, please give it a like, and also feel free to download this Excel sheet by going to network.dongxi.com, or just go to our Patreon page where you can also download this Excel sheet. And on our Patreon page, you can also support us with our mission and to create this kind of content by just sponsoring our content. And by the way, thank you so much for Matthew for becoming a new Patreon, and to our existing Patreons, Jan, Jack, Ivan, Bud, Ben, and Anna. We are very thankful that you are supporting our mission here. And for everybody else, I hope you like this content. Stay tuned for the next video on this. And until then, please stay safe and healthy, and have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.